This is Victoria Beal with the Ohio LTAP Center, and we're very pleased this afternoon to be able to host a webinar for you on Title VI requirements for local public agencies. We have two excellent presenters for you this afternoon. We have Christina Scales and Aisha Powell, who are both with the Division of Opportunity, Diversity, and Inclusion, who are going to cover this information for you. Before I turn things over to them, however, I want to let everyone who's on here with us know that we are attempting to record the webinar. If it is successful, we will definitely post the recording to our YouTube channel and send a link out to everyone. However, if for some reason technology fails us, at least you are on here and are able to get the information firsthand. And because you're on here, I want to also encourage you that if you have questions, please put them in the question box in your GoToWebinar panel while we are having the webinar presentation. I will, stop the presenters and read questions off to them as they come in. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them, because we want to make certain that this is an interactive experience and that you're able to hopefully get the answers that you need for the questions that you have concerning Title VI. So with that, ladies, are you ready to go?
Yes, we're ready.
All right, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So our webinar today is going to be walking through steps that everyone must take to ensure compliance with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And we hope this training will be beneficial for those who do not yet have a Title VI plan or have questions around what Title VI is and how local programs is impacted by it. Let's go ahead and get started. And please let me know if you're not able to see something on your screen, or we need to go back to a slide if you weren't able to see it. So this first slide here is just letting you know what Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is. So it simply just states that no person in the United States shall, on ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So with ODOT receiving federal funds from FHWA, that means that the local programs who receive funding from ODOT then also receive federal funding. Therefore, they need to comply with Title VI. Since the Civil Rights Act of 1964, many other non-discrimination authorities have been put into place to continue with non-discriminatory practices among programs and services that are federally funded, such as Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which applies to those with disabilities, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1973, which applies to a person's sex, the Age Discrimination Act of 1976, which applies to age, the Executive Order 12898 on environmental justice, which applies to minority and low-income status, and the Executive Order 13166 on limited English proficiency, or LEP, which applies to individuals who have limited abilities to read, speak, write, or understand English, as it is not their primary language. Title VI prohibits intentional and unintentional discrimination or disparate treatment and disparate impact. To provide an example of disparate treatment, that would be in a case where we say a bus driver was working for a transit provider that received federal funding through ODOT, but refused to allow a group of African-American teenagers to board the bus and refers to them using racial slurs, which is filmed and released on Twitter. This would be discrimination that we would consider intentional. So again, that would be disparate treatment. An example of disparate impact would be a new ODOT highway ramp project being built in a majority Chinese American neighborhood, which more negatively impacting their business revenues compared to an alternative with a lesser impact. This would be unintentional discrimination, which is again disparate impact. So we want to eliminate the barriers and conditions that and prevent underserved populations from receiving the access, participation, and benefits from federally assisted programs, services, and activities. Just to provide you all with some implementing regulations, so we have 49 CFR Part 21 that applies to the Title VI program activities receiving federal financial assistance through the U.S. DOT. And then we also have 23 CFR Part 200, which provides guidelines to recipients of FHWA on what is required to implement a Title VI program. So you'll be able to look up those regulations if you do want to have further detail around what those include. So complying with Title VI, as a subrecipient of funding from FHWA, Title VI applies to your entire road and highway transportation program. So subrecipients of ODOT must take steps to ensure they are compliant with Title VI. In order to have Title VI compliance in your agency, you need to create an assurance with your agency providing the federal funds. So the assurance provides FHWA the guarantee that your agency agrees to comply with all of the Title VI requirements. Submit signed Title VI assurance to ODOT annually affirming compliance with Title VI, and the non-discrimination language should be inserted into bid documents, contracts, and real estate documents. So the next few slides here are just going to show you some examples around, it's going to show you the actual assurances that you would need to include. So this first slide here is the assurance DOT order 1050.2A. And so you can see from the screenshot there that that's taken exactly from that document. So recipients must ensure that their programs will be administered in a non-discriminatory manner. And recipients must include language in their contracts to ensure those carrying out on the contract will not engage in discrimination. This next slide here is assurance bid language. So you would want to insert the following notification in all solicitation bids and requests for proposals for work or materials. So I won't read through the whole thing, but you are able to look that up again in the DOT order 1050.2A. The next slide here is talking about how you need to insert the clauses of Appendix A and Appendix E of the standard assurances in every contract. And you'll be able to see those examples here. And then assurance property language, so you want to insert the clauses of Appendix B of the standard assurances into deeds transferring United States property. Now, this Appendix B only applies to direct transfers from the United States and is rarely used. Next here is a screenshot of Appendix C of the standard assurances, and all deeds, leases, licenses, permits, or similar instruments or agreements for the transfer of real property acquired or improved under the activity, project, or program. Next is the assurance property language for construction, use or access to real property. And this is a screenshot of Appendix D. So again, you would include that in all deeds, leases, licenses, permits, or similar instruments or agreements for the construction, use, or access to real property acquired or improved under the activity, project, or program. And then here's some information around what should be included in the following instruments. So the example here on the left is going to be showing you what does need to be included. So that would be utility and other permits, oil and gas leases, cell tower leases and licenses, rental agreements, joint use agreements, airspace use agreements, memorandums of agreement concerning the use of property by other agencies, and transfers for less than fair market value, whether or not a revisionary interest is retained. On the right side there, talks about the language that does not need to be included. So that's any instrument by which the recipient acquires land or an interest in land, or any instrument by which the recipient disposes of all of its interest in the land to other property and receives full fair market value. And then we give verbiage around fair market value, including appraised value, reasonable negotiated price based upon an approved appraisal, or highest bid received as a result of the sufficiently advertised auction. Next, we're going to discuss policy statement and notice to the public. So you want to develop a policy statement signed by the head of your agency. So it's going to be outlining your commitment to non-discrimination in your activities and programs. You want to provide the public with a notice of their rights under Title VI and make the notice available to the public by either posting it on your agency's website or in public areas of the agency's office. There are 4 components of the Title VI notice. So first, it's going to be a brief statement of non-discrimination. Second, information on how to file a complaint. Third, information on who to contact with questions and concerns. And fourth, information on how to obtain information in language other than English. And just a note there that this information should be provided in the most commonly spoken language for your region. These next few slides here are really just going to point out an example of a policy statement and notice to the public. So this is ODOT's current notice to the public that we have. So you'll see the first example here is just a brief statement of non-discrimination. And then number 2, information on how to file a complaint. So you'll see we have listed there addresses that anyone can send information to, as well as filing deadlines for those to be aware of when they should be submitting the complaint and what information should be included. Number 3, so information on who to contact with questions and concerns. So as you can see, both my name and Aisha's name are listed there on our notice to the public with our titles, phone numbers, and email addresses for anyone to be able to reach out to us with any of their questions or concerns. And then lastly, information on how to obtain information in language other than English. So you'll see we will have a phone number listed there to say if they need any additional information in Spanish is what we have listed, and then we provide a phone number. So again, this would be an example where you could provide information in a language that's most commonly spoken in your region. If it happens to not be Spanish or something else, you make sure that you include that. Next, we're going to be talking about designating a Title VI coordinator. So the Title VI coordinator designated will monitor any Title VI activities, prepare the Title VI program plan, and other reporting for submission to ODOT and/or FHWA. It is also necessary for the Title VI coordinator to have easy access to the head of the agency for discussions about any concerns or complaints that arise and need to be taken care of. You will want to train your staff on Title VI. So Title VI training should be provided for all staff in your agency. This is obviously for everyone to understand what Title VI is and how to respond if anyone has questions. And it's important to be able to assist properly. The training can be an e-learning or an in-person training, whatever works best for your agency, or even having staff attend training programs offered by ODOT, FHWA, or any other entity that provides relevant training. Next, we'll cover our complaint procedures. So for Title VI complaints, you will want to create a Title VI complaint form, whether that form be an online form or one that can be printed from your website. Tracking the complaints are also really important. That can be done on a shared drive for anyone to have access to, or a different database that will help with tracking the important information from the complaint, including all the steps and documentation leading up to the resolution. If a formal Title VI complaint does come, do not take it upon yourself to investigate. Please send the complaint to ODOT for proper processing, and then ODOT will follow up with you on what additional information that we may need or what next steps should be taken. Items you want to include in your complaint procedure. So you want to include the time frame for people to understand, so that a complaint must be filed no later than 180 days after the date of the last instance of the alleged discrimination. You also want to include how complaints should be submitted. So complaints should be in writing and signed by the complainant. And then also what information we should include in the complaint, which we'd want contact information, the basis of the complaint, person or agency alleged to have discriminated, dates, and an explanation of what happened. And on this slide, we just have an example of a complaint form. This just kind of gives you an idea of what it potentially looked like. But obviously, for your own agency, you can have your own version. It does not have to look exactly like this. But again, just making for sure that you include all the things that we just went over on the complaint form, so that way you have all the proper information that you need. Next, moving on to data collection and analysis. So understanding the local demographic is important to be able to refrain from any disparate impacts that could potentially happen. Understand what demographics live in certain areas and how this demographic utilizes the programs and services provided will be beneficial to any translation needs and or where projects might impact certain communities, for example. Collect and analyze the data to identify and remedy any potential Title VI concerns. With developing and implementing a public involvement plan, it's important to describe how minority, low-income, and LAP populations are going to be included in this planning process. You want to describe what steps will be taken to ensure events are in a location that are accessible to all persons. And lastly, describe the process by providing the information in alternative formats, such as sign language or Braille. Things to also keep in mind will be conducting meetings and workshops at varied times of the day, including evening meetings to encourage participation of all. Also, potentially contract with community-based organizations in low-income and minority communities for targeted outreach. Maintaining your website with updated information will be helpful too, and can keep things interactive from an online perspective as well. Limited English proficiency, or LEP. We want to provide language assistance for the LEP population as part of Title VI, and taking the extra steps to provide information in other languages for those who have limited ability to read, speak, write, or understand English. Conducting an LEP needs assessment and addressing how information will be provided in languages other than English will be helpful to be inclusive for all populations. From these assessments, you will want to be able to train your staff to be alert to and potentially anticipate the needs of any LEP participation in programs and services provided. So you also want to conduct a 4-factor analysis. So the 4 parts of that analysis will be: 1, to determine the proportion of LEP persons served or likely to be encountered in the eligible service population. 2, assess the frequency with which LEP individuals come in contact with your programs, activities, or services. 3, consider the nature and importance of the programs, activities, or services provided. And 4, evaluate the resources available and associated costs of providing interpretation and translation services. So with the safe harbor provision, we have a couple points here to identify that. So it identifies a threshold for determining whether a document should be translated into a language other than English. Providing translation for groups that meet the threshold is considered strong evidence of compliance. The threshold equals 1,000 persons, or 5% of the total population eligible to be served or likely to be affected or encountered, and only applies to translation of written documents and does not affect the requirement to provide meaningful access through oral language services. So you will want to identify vital documents. And a vital document is any document that is critical for ensuring meaningful access to your major activities and programs. So whether a document is vital may depend on the importance of the program, information, encounter, or service involved, and the consequence to the LEP person if the information is not provided accurately or in a timely manner. More information about language assistance. So ODOT utilizes a third-party language assistance service called VocalLink. We use them for assistance with any vital documents or translator that's needed for any meetings or programs. It's also recommended to leverage current employees of your agency that may be multilingual and keep a list of those who volunteer to assist as needed. So just to go over some compliance monitoring roles. So we do have the role of the recipient, which is any agency receiving federal funding for construction or other related project or activity. So the recipients of federal funds make all the agency's actions subject to compliance with Title VI. In this case, ODOT is the recipient for local program agencies. Sub-recipients are an agency receiving funding from the primary recipient in order to carry out a project. So local program agencies are the sub-recipient of ODOT's federal funding and therefore subject to sub-recipient monitoring by ODOT. Additionally, we do have the regulation here listed, 23 CFR 200.9 B7, which states ODOT must conduct reviews of local public agencies, planning agencies, and other recipients of federal aid highway funds. So monitoring, ODOT may perform Title VI monitoring activities through surveys and online visits. Any technical assistance, ODOT will provide you with any needed assistance around Title VI to help you stay in compliance. And ODOT is not reviewing your Title VI activities as means to make non-compliance findings against your agency or to impact your agency's eligibility for federal funding through ODOT. Additionally, on this last slide, one of these last slides here, we do have some examples of Title VI plans from 3 different cities here, 2 in Indiana and 1 in Michigan. So those provided links you'll be able to go to see what their Title VI plan looks like. We thought that they were good examples of Title VI plans within our closer region here to be able to maybe follow their format if you find those to be helpful for you. Additionally, some other resources here are going to be ODOT's Title VI webpage, FHWA's Title VI webpage, DOJ's LEP website, and ODOT's local programs webpage. And that concludes our presentation on Title VI. I guess we'll open the floor up now for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you. We do have one that came in. It said, from an earlier slide, Title VI applies to all programs, aka projects. And then of course a question mark. Sorry. It says, even those without federal funding, question? If a complaint is received for a locally funded project, would it have to be forwarded to ODOT? And if so, why and where is this required?
Okay, so to answer that question, yes, the guidance that we have received from the Federal Highway Administration is that if you receive federal aid highway funds, it does impact everything that you do. Because you have received the federal funds, everything that you do must be compliant with Title VI. So yes, if you have a project and that project isn't a local LEP project that was funded through ODOT or otherwise does not have federal funding in it, yes, you should still be taking steps to make sure that you're administering that project in a way that's non-discriminatory. So yes, if somebody were to file a complaint, anytime somebody files a Title VI complaint, Federal Highway has directed that it must be sent to them. So if they have filed a formal complaint saying that they were discriminated against in the process of you administering that project or a program, you would need to forward that to ODOT so that we can follow the protocols laid out by the Federal Highway Administration.
Okay, there is a way for me to respond to that question in the question box, but I couldn't type that fast. So I just want the person to know that, we'll go ahead and send out a follow-up email with that answer on the email. And then the next question that came in, this is, will you be able to share this PowerPoint presentation with the folks who are attending? Actually, I am uploading it to the handout box as we speak. So here in just a second, it should be available for all of you to download. And I will also follow up. There we go. It should be available for you to download now. And I will also follow up with an email with the PowerPoint attached for you. Let's see what other questions we have. All right, another one that came in. It says, some of us receive FTA funds and need to meet their requirements. Should FTA be mentioned in the PowerPoint?
That's a good question. ODOT also receives FTA funds, and unfortunately, the operating administrations of USDOT are not always on the same page. We are particularly concerned about federal aid highway funds because it's our understanding that when you all are receiving funds through the local LEP program, they're federal highway funds. So we wanted to make sure that you all know what to do to be compliant with federal highway. We have worked with FTA to make sure that what we're doing is compliant with both federal highway and federal transit. So if you were to do these things, that should also enable you to be compliant with federal transit's requirements as well. Because Title VI is one law, there are little quirks in how each of the operating administrations like to do things, but the primary point is that you take steps to make sure that you're not discriminating in the delivery of your programs and services. And the assurances are the same. USDOT sent out the assurances. It's the same document. It's the same language for all of the operating administrations. The slight difference between federal highway and federal transit is probably how they handle complaints. Federal transit does like for their recipients and subrecipients to attempt to address the complaint at the lowest level possible. So if you have a transit agency and it's a rider, perhaps, that's complaining, if the transit provider has a process to handle complaints, which they should if they get FTA funds, they would like for the transit agency to try to resolve the issue with the rider, the user of the services, before it gets elevated. Now, they would need to track it. We talked about, tracking and logging complaints. So they would need to do that and report it if you get funds from FTA directly, you need to be able to report that to FTA. If they're getting funds through ODOT, report that to ODOT, and ODOT would also be reporting that to FTA. But that's probably the major difference that we've noticed between federal highway and federal transit, is just how they handle complaints.
Okay. Don't see any other questions. Oh, one just popped in. Would you be willing to look over our plan and documents to make sure we do not miss anything?
Yes, absolutely. We are happy to provide technical assistance for anybody who needs it. So feel free to call us, email us. If you want to send us something to look over, we're happy to look over it and make suggestions, whatever you need, we're happy to assist.
Great. I think that's a wonderful service that you can provide. Next question. What if we are funding our project with 100% local resources? Do we still need to have Title VI forms?
So I guess I'd have a little bit of a follow-up question to that. So if if you're 100% locally funded for every project, every transportation project that you do, and you don't receive federal funding at all, then technically, no, I don't think you would be required to have a Title VI program. But if you do receive any federal funds for transportation, yes, you would need to have a Title VI program.
So you're saying if they get funds in one project, maybe once every 3 or 4 years, then that impacts all of the projects that they do, that they're paying for with their own local funds as well.
Yes, that is the understanding that we have gotten from Federal Highway. I think some years ago they gave a presentation that basically they said if you get $1, that it obligates you to comply with Title VI. Now, I do want to clarify, at this point, we are not doing any, as Christina mentioned in the slides, we're not doing any kind of compliance reviews where we're going to be coming out and looking over documents and, taking any steps to impact your eligibility for federal funding. Right now we just want to make you aware of Title VI and that there is a requirement not to discriminate when you deliver your programs and services to the public, and the types of things that ODOT or Federal Highway or even Federal Transit might be looking for if we were to come out and ask you about a Title VI program. And so you have some time to get these things together. We'll help you get them together. It isn't anything that you have to do right now to be able to continue to participate in the local LEP program. We would certainly give you notice well in advance if we were going to take some steps like that.
And a follow-up question from someone who asked one earlier. What if the projects are in another department and not for transportation? I would think that they're asking what if the projects, yeah.
Sure, so I understand, you may have, different departments in your, municipality or county or whatever.
Yeah, they
so we're
put a clarifying comment
concerned.
in here. Sorry, just to let you know, the clarifying comment they put in, it says that they meant projects that are not for transportation. Say they're getting funding for home repair or weatherization, for example.
Okay, so yes, Federal Highway is particularly, they have clarified this for us in the last year or so. They are particularly concerned with highway projects, so highway transportation projects. So if you're doing other types of projects or other departments in your county or city are also get federal funding, they would be required to do whatever the entity that they're getting funding requires. So Federal Highway is only concerned about the federal funding that you get from ODOT to do highway projects. And then obviously transit would be concerned about the transit services. But yes, so if your city's doing some other stuff, or police and fire gets federal money, that we're not concerned about that. Or if you have jobs and family services or something, and they get money from another part of the federal government, they would have their own requirements with that federal agency. So that would not be required for you to report to us or Federal Highway.
Okay, another question for you. So is this the requirement forever?
I guess I'm not I'm sure what that means forever. So I guess the answer is yes. So Title VI has been in place since 1964. And so I guess I would say as long as you're receiving federal aid highway funds through ODOT, then yes, you would be required to comply with Title VI. If you're not receiving any federal money from USDOT, then you wouldn't be required to comply with these requirements. But as long as you're receiving federal aid highway funds, these would be required. But once these processes are in place, you have them available, and you can just maintain.
Here's a follow-up for that person that asked that forever question. So what if it has been 10 years since receiving federal funds? Is it still a requirement?
So if you have not received any federal funds in 10 years, then I would say no. I mean, we kind of do annual reporting with Federal Highway. I would kind of think you'd want to maybe be getting money on an annual basis, or if you're getting it intermittently, but you're continuing to get it still, you would probably need to have a program in place. But if it's been 10 years since you've gotten any federal funds, then and you're not currently getting any federal funds, and you don't have any plan to apply for federal funding, I don't think you would need to establish a Title VI program. Now, you always can establish a non-discrimination program, just as a good practice as far as your interactions with the public, but you wouldn't need to.
Another question for you. Does Safe Routes to Schools sidewalk program fall under this rule?
That's a good question. Because generally how we treat Safe Routes to School is it's all part of ODOT. It's all part of programs that ODOT delivers. So we would, from an ODOT perspective, also expect that as the Safe Routes to School programs being delivered, that we would do it in a non-discriminatory way. So I guess our expectation is that you all would probably do the same, because that's generally how we approach it. And Title VI really comes into play when you're actually constructing a project, mostly in kind of the planning phase and public engagement. So yes, as far as Safe Routes to School, for example, when we engage the public, when we're doing some community education, we do use our Title VI program. We have translated documents for our Safe Routes to School program if they're going into a Spanish-speaking community or a Somali-speaking community. So we do utilize Title VI for our Safe Routes to School program. So, but that's where we've seen it the most is translation of documents. So yeah, I think we probably would anticipate the same would apply to you.
Yep, and someone who's on the webinar actually is involved with the Safe Routes program here at ODOT, and they commented that yes, Safe Routes does fall under Title VI because it's federal funds.
Yes.
So I think we're good there. I don't see any other questions right now, though. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat pod, because if not, we're going to give everybody a little bit of time back in their lives to move on to other things. But right now you've got the experts here, so please pose your questions if you have them. Not seeing anything else come in. So we do have your contact information on the slide, and I want to thank both of you very much, Christina and Aisha, for taking your time to do not only this webinar, but we have a great article coming out in our LTAP newsletter, which will be issued out here in the next few days, that also talks about Title VI and the resources that are available to help. We do have one more question that came in. It says, do these requirements apply to all programs, such as for airport projects?
They do if you're doing like paving and stuff like that at the airport, and you're getting, because FAA is, I mean, I'm not sure the source of the funding, but obviously FAA is also part of USDOT and also has Title VI requirements. We don't deal with FAA a lot, but yeah, I mean, if you're paving a runway or something like that, it would fall under Title VI.
Great. And I don't, one more question. I just thought we were going to wrap up, but, oh, and actually it's more of a question for the LTAP, somebody who wanted to be added to our distribution list for webinars and newsletters. I'll be happy to send that out to everybody. We do have an email listserv sign up. If you're interested in that, I'll send you out the information so you have that to sign up. But thank you everyone for being on the webinar, and thank you so much to our presenters. Oh, they said great job to both of you. That you guys have done a great job with the information and definitely in answering everyone's questions. So we appreciate your time on the webinar, and if the technology is successful, I'll be sending out a link to the recording hopefully here as well pretty soon. So everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.